Welcome to Zombie Strains, the podcast that watches all the zombie movies. We have a treat for you this week as Andy and I dive into 1960s spooky zombie television. This week, it's the show Thriller from 1961 with the episode Pigeons from Hell.
You know, I've seen people act like that in pictures. What do they call them? Zombies or something?
Zombies?
What's a zombie? Well, a zombie is, Mr. Bill is...
The living dead.
They are the living dead.
Get into zombies.
It's an army of zombies no armies could stand.
The unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims.
I saw the dead rise.
Kill the brain, and you kill the ghoul.
Hey everybody, I'm John.
And I'm Andy.
And once again, we have locked producer Brad out of the Zombie Strains lab, and we'll be discussing things without him. So,
yes,
yeah, we're taking a little break between movies before season 3. Season 3 is a big season for us. It's going to cover just the 1970s, and though it's not the last movie we watch in the 70s, it's going to culminate with, of course, Dawn of the Dead in 1978. But we've got a long way to go before we get there. And while producer Brad is prepping that and doing a lot of research, Andy and I thought we would do some fun episodes on other things we sort of didn't get a chance to cover. And Andy, tell us what your idea was and what you discovered.
Yeah, well, what I was thinking is, so this podcast is about the evolution of zombie movies.
Yes.
But one thing that means we don't usually cover is zombies as they appeared in television during these decades.
Yep.
So with the exception of one episode from The Man from U.N.C.L.E., we have to date skipped watching TV shows that involve zombies. But in the 60s, there were a couple of television shows that feature zombies, and John and I thought it would be interesting to see, just to visit those and see how they mirror or don't mirror the zombie movies that were playing in theaters at the same time.
Yes.
So that's where we are today.
So the episode that Andy pitched to me, he didn't know how excited I would be. It's a show I'd never heard of. It is a horror anthology show called Thriller from the early 60s. It ran from 1960 to 1962 and had about 67 episodes. It's of the Twilight Zone style, but it is different. First of all, it's earlier than the Twilight Zone. And second of all, it has a more dramatic flair to it, and is not as sort of twisty and clever as the Twilight Zone. But the important part for us is the host is not Rod Serling like the Twilight Zone. It is our his fan favorite and Zombie Strain's favorite, Boris Karloff. Yeah. Which was interesting to me. So he sort of comes in the beginning of the show and he talks about the terrors that you're about to encounter. And it's kind of delightful when we get to that part. I will, because he doesn't do it at the beginning. It's sort of like it's almost structured like a movie. There's like a teaser beginning, then Boris comes in and tells us the scoop, and then we jump back into the episode. The other delightful thing about this TV show is that it's the old commercial model. So a 60-minute TV show has 52 minutes of TV, which is so foreign to us. That's like that's like 10 minutes longer than like. Did you know, for example, I didn't know this until much later, that when you and I were watching Star Trek reruns in the late 70s and early 80s, those were not the original broadcast versions because there were now more commercials. So they cut a bunch of stuff, and I didn't actually see the fuller versions until later, until VHS and DVD. Yeah. So anyway, there's the same kind of thing here. But that's not the important part. The important part is that it's based on a story called, and don't laugh, Pigeons from Hell. And
sorry.
That's an unfortunate name for a great story by one of our great pulp writers. So it is a horror story by a man named Robert E. Howard. Do you know what Robert E. Howard is famous for, Andy?
He's most famous for the Conan stories, right?
Correct. He invented the adventurer Conan the Cimmerian, a.k.a. the Barbarian. He also invented some other characters which you probably haven't heard of, but have been around. He invented Solomon Kane, which had a movie and some stories. He invented a boxer. He also invented Red Sonja. However, it's not the Red Sonja that you know about from the Conan comic books and a couple of movies. She was actually a Ukrainian, Polish warrior and adventuress who she had a gun and a cutlass, and she was trapped during the siege of Vienna and had it personally in for the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan. So that's her story. She only appeared in one story, and then the comic writers took her, put her in a chainmail bikini, and turned her into.
Okay, yeah, I only know the chainmail bikini version.
Yeah.
That's my mind is being blown right now.
Yes, exactly. However, let's talk about Howard for a minute, and then we'll get into this story because I think his biography is interesting. So Robert E. Howard, the author of the original story, was born on January 22nd, 1906 in Peaster, Texas. When he was a teenager, he moved to Cross Plains, Texas. And at the age of 11, he started writing pulp stories. And he wrote so many stories that in 1925, when he was only 19, he started submitting them to a lot of the pulp story magazines that were out at the time. And he finally got accepted in a magazine called Weird Tales. Andy, you've heard of Weird Tales. What is Weird Tales famous for?
Weird Tales is probably best known today for featuring some of the stories of H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes.
But it was sort of an incubator for a lot of pulp horror and fantasy writers. Would that be a good thing to say?
Yeah, and you can think of it as like this group of quote-unquote amateur writers who found an outlet for these pulpy stories they were writing, these stories of high adventure or deep horror. And in fact, one of the connecting tissues of this whole group was H.P. Lovecraft. I don't know that we are going to get to some of his work. For example, there's an 80s version of one of his stories called Reanimator, which is nothing like the story, but we'll get to him eventually.
Yes.
But he was also a famous he corresponded with all the other writers. And I think, Andy, you read his collected letters, which was like 1,600 pages.
I read a very huge biography that was like 1,600 pages. But Lovecraft is famous for an absolutely insane amount of correspondence.
Yeah, I said collected letters, but that would be impossible.
Thousands of letters. Yeah, it's like it was a genuinely sobering thing to realize how much correspondence he sent and received from other people. It's just like an alien world from today, right? Where like we are hard pressed to respond to an email, right?
Yes.
This was someone who probably devoted like hours of each day to just writing letters to people.
Yeah. So this Weird Tales group was all sort of connected through him. Anyway, we don't have to belabor this. Robert E. Howard invented Conan. But back to our actual episode. I was never going to get a chance to talk about Robert E. Howard on this podcast, so I'm just seizing my opportunity.
Yes, of course.
In any case, it is the 36th episode from season 1. That's a lot of episodes.
Ooh.
Yeah, this was a 2-season show with 67 episodes, just so you have an idea of it. It stars, of course, Boris Karloff. It was written by John Knubel, with credit to Robert E. Howard, directed by John Newland. They did make changes to the story, and when we get to those, I will cover them. It stars a couple of people. We won't go into them in detail. None of them are super famous today, other than Boris Karloff. Brandon DeWild plays Tim in this episode. He is the survivor. He actually had a tragic life. He also died young. He was a rising actor. He had just starred across from Paul Newman in a movie called HUD. And he was driving to the hospital to check on his wife and died in a car accident. She had just had surgery. So it's very sad. It also stars David Worf as Johnny Branner, who is Tim's friend, and we'll find out what happens to Johnny pretty quick. Cran Denton plays the sheriff in this episode, and there is an old servant from Barbados who holds the secret to this story. His name in the TV episode is Jacob Blount. He's played by Ken Renard. So the only last name I wanted to mention, and we're not going to go into this in detail, there's a woman named Otola Nesmith who there's a sort of elderly character later in the story, played by this woman. She was born in 1889. And had been a professional actress, and this is one of her last roles. So I just found that absolutely delightful.
I didn't recognize him, but the sheriff actor, who I've forgotten his name already, he had incredible like that guy vibes.
Yeah,
didn't he seem like he would be a perfect character actor for this sort of role?
Yeah, if you look through his stuff, it's every show from the 1960s. Perry Mason, The Gunslinger, The Texan, all
yes, totally.
Everything.
He has that look.
But he was in a couple of famous movies. He was in To Kill a Mockingbird as a minor character. So, he's definitely He has like 1 billion credits, and he's been in everything. Yes, it's Sheriff Bruckner. So
Okay.
I don't think we need to go into too much more detail about the production here. I've rattled on long enough. Let's talk about this story and the opening.
So just to start here, I have not read the story. I have obviously watched this episode. So is there anything you want to tell us about the story that we need to know before we jump into this adaptation of it?
I don't think so, because it actually follows the story very closely. And the important difference, there's two important differences. One is geographic, which doesn't make that much of a difference. This episode is set in Louisiana, I think, the Deep South, in like swampy Louisiana. Most of Howard's stories were set in East Texas, sort of on the Arkansas border, where there's also a swampy area, like pine swamp kind of stuff. And that's where that's set in his story. So there's a change of location. The other big difference is the ending is different in an important way that we will talk about when we get there. So,
well, can we talk then, before we even get into it, can we talk about the setting?
Yes.
So this is set in the swamps of Louisiana, right?
It is.
Or thereabouts.
Do you want me to give a short summary of the episode, and then we can dive into the details?
Yeah, sure. Give a short summary, and then I have a question about just the geography.
Sure.
So go ahead.
So two friends are traveling, presumably from New York. They're driving through the Deep South, and their car gets stuck. And they can't get it out, so they find this creepy old plantation where they decide to spend the night like you do. However, this plantation is swarmed with pigeons, hence the name of the story. During that encounter, in that first night, one of the friends, Johnny, dies and comes back to life and tries to kill Timmy, who flees into the swamp, finds the local sheriff, and together he and the sheriff try to figure out what is behind all of this. So that's and it has to do with sinister family secrets and that sort of thing. So
yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I feel like post-Civil War plantation, America does not have a rich history of scary Gothic locations.
No.
But I think the best we can do, and it can be quite good, is this creepy old southern plantation deep in the swamp. That's as close as we get to like a Gothic castle from Europe.
Yes, and in fact, if you remember the intro to the show, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, it features a Gothic house in a swampy, foggy land. It doesn't say the Deep South, but that's the exact image because it's probably our most iconic image, like that, of that type.
Okay, so do you want your drive-in today, John? So jump us into the story here.
Yeah, so we meet our two main characters. They're driving. They're clearly lost. They're driving on a road. We see the exterior of their car, which is a 1953 Ford Crestline Sunliner.
This thing, I marvel sometimes at the tank-like size and bulk of these cars.
It's fairly ridiculous.
Yeah.
However, immediately their car gets stuck. It hits a tree, and it ends up with one wheel in the swamp, which looks like quicksand kind of stuff. And they realize they're not going to get this thing out. They debate walking back to the town. Johnny goes off to find a log or something, so they can lever the car or put it under the tire so the tire can roll. However, what he finds instead is a old plantation, and swarming this plantation and on the lawn in front of it are hundreds of what, Andy?
Hundreds of pigeons.
Pigeons, yes. And as he approaches this, they all attack him. And he goes running and he screams, and his friend Tim, the other guy in the car, comes running. The pigeons have settled down by the time Tim gets there, but Johnny is absolutely horrified by this exchange. And I think that's where the teaser ends. Then we get to Boris.
Yeah. So let's pause for a quick second, though. So pigeons, like you said at the beginning, the title "Pigeons from Hell" feels a little unfortunate.
Yes, it doesn't really help.
It can be an effective horror trope to take something that is very much the opposite of horrifying and just put it into a context we're not used to to make it scary, right? So think Hitchcock's The Birds or something like that, right? So I think that's what they're going for here, just the incongruity of seeing this flock of pigeons in the middle of this swamp. I think, is it scary? Not exactly, but it just discombobulates you a little bit.
It does. And I would actually argue this episode does a great job with that cooing pigeon sound.
Yes.
As a sort of harbinger of scary things to come, which they execute really well. Then we get to Boris with the worst pencil mustache. Like, it's bad, Boris. I don't know what you got going on there. But he actually gives a wonderful intro about spirits coming back to life and the spell of a terrible curse. Here's a clip of some of what he says right here.
Spirits come back from the dead to guard their ancestral home against intruders. Spirits that in life fed on evil and now in death return to feed upon the living. Return each night, driven relentlessly by the spell of a terrible curse.
What I love about this little Rod Serling-esque introduction is that he's constantly glancing around fearfully as if he's there in the horror story. It's very different than the way Rod Serling does it, and I found it delightful.
Yeah, I love Boris. He's just you could put Boris in the crappiest movie ever, and he's just gonna sell it. Like, he just goes for it. And his narration is so funny. Once you realize he's the narrator of The Grinch, you're like, well, now I can't unhear that. So when he's narrating this horrible, scary thing, when you don't see him, you're like, oh, here's The Grinch, So it's kind of funny in that way.
Yeah. So, but he goes on for quite a while. Like, I think as we've noticed in some other movies we've covered, John, there's a certain virtue in the brevity of Rod Serling's introductions. Yes. But, Karloff here goes on about spirits returning from death to guard their home against intruders.
Yes, which is delightful.
So you're being primed for the rest of this story.
Yes. So let's get back to our story. We've got John and Tim. Now, could we talk about Tim for a second? He's our survivor. John's about to buy it, and I'll tell you how in a second. But Tim is the guy who's like, he didn't get scared. He didn't get attacked by the pigeons, but he's like, hey, let's just stay here. Let's stay in this abandoned old house. It'll be fine. We'll just get up tomorrow. It's getting dark. Who is this person? Like, is it just because we grew up watching Friday the 13th that we think this person who would be like, yeah, what's the big deal? It's just a creepy ancient house covered in cobwebs. Let's just stay here. Like, who is that person? I don't think that person actually exists anymore.
Yes. He's such a Boy Scout,
yes,
like in his appearance and his demeanor throughout.
Oh, I forgot to mention something about him. He tragically died at 1930, but you want to know his first movie role is? A big movie role? He played the little boy in Shane, starring Alan Ladd. So when there's that little boy running at the end going, Shane, come back, this is that same actor. So... in any case, yes, he's got the whole Boy Scout thing going on. One thing I like about their relationship, so in the stories, they are not brothers. In this, they are brothers. And they have that sort of disgruntled, argumentative banter that brothers would have, right? They're irritated with each other. They sort of challenge each other. So I actually really liked that part of the story, right?
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So they decide they camp out in the middle of the floor. They do start a fire in the fireplace. They go to sleep, and John awakens in the middle of the night, and he hears something upstairs. Now, did you feel that John was investigating something upstairs, or do you feel like he was compelled, like in a trance?
Good question. I thought at the time I watched it that he was investigating.
I think so, too.
However, later, so what he hears is the sound of a woman singing.
Yes.
Later, a character will hear the same sound and will act as if he is being compelled to go up there to meet it.
Yes, I agree.
I felt like he was just being drawn up by his kind of morbid curiosity about what's going on.
I agree. In the story, he is in a trance. He gets summoned by the woman. But here, the actor plays it as if he just has to look into it. You know what I mean? He still looks like he is aware of himself. In any case,
it's worth noting that at this point, when they were briefly exploring the house before setting out their sleeping bags.
Oh, right.
The camera did zoom in on the painting, an old painting of a woman.
Yes.
So
thank you for flagging that, because that will, of course, become important later.
Yes. As the camera zooms in for like 10 seconds, you're like, oh, I wonder if this will prove to be central to the plot.
Yeah. So now this scare is identical to the story. Good, because it's great. So what happens is John wanders upstairs. He wanders into the darkness. You hear him scream This wakes up Tim, who rushes up the stairs, and he hears something, and he's like, John? He's calling from, Johnny? Are you there? And out of the darkness, holding a bloody hatchet, is John. But his own head has been split in half, and he lumbers towards Tim, swings his hatchet, just barely missing Tim, who flees into the swamp. And then the show goes to commercial. Now, I want to talk about this because this is I think there's 2 zombies in this show. This is the first one we see.
Yes.
How do we feel about this zombie, Andy?
Well, first off, I was a little surprised this was on TV in the early 60s because, like, by modern standards, of course, it's quite tame, but he's, like, covered with blood.
And the hatchet is dripping blood, and it's clear that he's dead, and he's come back, and he's using the hatchet that we used to kill him to try to kill Tim. I mean, that's a lot.
I was pretty impressed by our first zombie.
Yeah, he is very much a mindless killer, in a sense. Like,
at this point, we've watched zombie movies that have much less scary, grotesque zombies than this. And
he feels more like a modern zombie in the sense that, like, he seems mindless and he has one goal, which is to kill the human. You know what I mean? Tim runs into the swamp. He passes out and gets found by a local guy who lives in a shack with his wife.
Can I pause here for a minute? It is kind of funny. He's like sprinting and he just sort of collapses as if from exhaustion.
Yes.
When is the last modern movie you watched, John, where the hero fainted?
Yeah. You know, that's a great question.
I feel like it's just a thing you don't put in stories anymore.
No. And I think it's great here, actually. Tim is not some sort of, unstoppable hero. I think the sheriff has a little bit of that going on, but Tim is always afraid in this story, in this episode, for sure. In any case, he gets found in the swamp by a local. The local brings him home and goes to fetch the sheriff, who's our other more important character, Sheriff Bruckner. They eventually prod Tim into telling his story, and the sheriff, I think, we notice right away, is suspicious. However, when Tim describes where he came from, he very clearly says, "Oh, that sounds like you were at the old, is it Blansonville? Is that the
Blazenville?
Blazenville place." Which clearly scares Howard, the guy who found him. Howard's not going to be around long, so don't worry about him. Yeah. But clearly scares him and his wife. Tim tells his story about his friend trying to kill him. And the sheriff goes, well, we're going to have to go back up there. Howard, who's the local, grab your shotgun and let's go. He's basically creating a posse on the spot. Yeah. Howard looks at him, turns, and sprints out the door into the swamp by himself.
I love that.
Yeah. So we get the sense that the Blazenville plantation is bad news. And so there's probably a history to this place. So the sheriff and Tim head back. Now, I can't remember if this is when the sheriff gives us the background. I think I'm just going to tell you the story, right, of this place, of the plantation. It comes out, it sort of gets drawn out throughout the show.
Yeah, it's a little bit later, technically, when the big info dump comes, but why don't you tell us the backstory of the plantation now?
Correct. So apparently this was the home of 3 sisters, and the woman in the portrait was one of those sisters. And apparently all of the sisters left or moved away. Nobody really knows what's happened to them, but one who lived there for a long time. Eventually, she disappeared as well, and the place was abandoned. And the other thing you learn is that there were 2 servants who lived with them after the war. They were from Barbados. There was Jacob, who will come up later, and there was, what is her name?
Eula Lee.
And there was Eula Lee. And we don't know too much about them right now, but this is the situation, is that something drove this family from this place, and we know that they were cruel to their servants.
Yes. And isn't it suggested that, most everybody else except the sisters and these 2 servants fled over time?
Except one, but yes. Yep. So they get there, and the sheriff really doubts Tim's story. It's clear at this point that the sheriff is like, oh, so your friend is dead here because he tried to kill you because he was a zombie, and I'm supposed to believe that. Like,
yeah, the sheriff doesn't believe.
The sheriff doesn't buy it all. However, they're here, and they decide they've got to investigate now.
When they get there, there's no pigeons at all, because remember, Tim has been babbling about all the pigeons.
Yeah, and the pigeons have gone. Now, I also want to say earlier, when they first settled down in the living room, back when it was just Tim and before John was a zombie, they did hear the pigeon sounds, and those are going to come back later. So thank you for reminding me about that. But now, one thing about this Southern sheriff that's totally unbelievable, his gun is like a pea shooter. Like it's like a 38 special or something. I kind of hoped he would have like a classic Texas revolver, but alas, no. However, they do decide they are going to poke around and go upstairs. The sheriff has a kerosene lantern. He's going to let Tim go with him because Tim does not want to stay alone downstairs. And the sheriff warns him, and I love this bit. He says, "Don't you think of trying anything. I shoot faster than a cat can jump."
Yes.
So they go up to a room. There's a room at the end of the hall, and so they go in there. It's very tense. They're creeping through the darkness. The sheriff Buckner is holding up his lantern. They go into this room, and they find what looks like an abandoned bedroom. There's a bunch of stuff there, but in that room, there's another room. And as soon as they approach it, what happens to the sheriff's kerosene lantern?
Yeah, it goes out.
And he shakes it and says, "Wait, there's plenty of kerosene in here." And they suddenly agree, like, okay. Like for a change, we have people in a horror movie that are like, okay, let's get out of here. Let's go. Let's back off and regroup, right?
Yes. And they did find up there at the top of the stairs, they did find a big splotch of blood.
Yes.
Where Johnny had been killed. And that's where the sheriff is like, doesn't believe that someone who was hit hard enough to splash this much blood around does not believe that person could have been up and threatening his brother.
Exactly. And then he has the bit with the room where the lantern goes out. It's still night, so they flee downstairs. And what happens when they hit the bottom of the stairs?
Well, the lantern comes back up. So it's a really localized, darkness.
Yes. So here's what they decide to do. They decide to load Johnny in the sheriff's station wagon.
Yeah.
Which is a 1939 Mercury. Anyway, it's a Woody, as they say. This is where we really get the info dump on the story and that they've all fled 50 years ago. We hear that one of the servants who they were cruel to, Jacob, survived. And he's going to become important in a little bit. They do go back up during the day. However, they realize there's a piano up there and there's no dust on the keys as if someone has been playing it.
That was a good touch.
They also decide they decide not to go into the room again because of the lantern issue, but they do find in that room a diary of Elizabeth Blazenville.
Dust all over everything, tons of it. Nothing on this keyboard.
It's as though somebody plays it.
Maybe somebody does.
What's that?
Looks like a diary. Very fine writing. Can you make it out?
I can sense someone prowling about the house at night. After the sun has set. And the pines outside are black.
And it mentions Jacob in this journal. So this is when they're about to open the door again, but the lamp goes out. So the sheriff decides, let's regroup again. I think we're solving the mystery of what happened to the Blazenville sisters. Let's go talk to Jacob. He's actually still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can I say, at this point, I got kind of the whole diary bit, I got a little confused about what was going on in the backstory. Is the idea that the last sister Elizabeth suspected that Jacob was stalking around the house? Is that the idea?
I think what she says is that Jacob knows something, but he won't talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That makes sense then. Yes.
Yes. So they go to Jacob. He lives in a shack in the middle of the swamp. He's 97 years old, and the poor sheriff busts into his house. He's like, "Jacob, wake up!" The guy's having a nap.
Yeah, and if you were thinking, as you've sort of been hinted that maybe you should, that Jacob is the one stalking around killing people, when you see how old and feeble he is, you realize that can't be the whole story.
That can't be the case. So they wake Jacob up, and they start to make him talk. This is a great scene. Jacob is great. The sheriff is great. So Jacob tells them about, what is her name again?
Eulalie.
Eulalie. And he says, Eulalie came to me. But then he says, I can't tell you. And they're like, why? Here's a clip of what he says.
Jacob, it is Eulalie in that house, isn't it?
Life is sweet to an old man.
And then he says this line about the big serpent is going to send one of his little brothers if I talk. So he does decide to talk, however, and he says that he is actually a voodoo practitioner. And many years ago, Eulalie came to him and said, give me that potion that turns people into zombies. And so the question is, who got turned into a zombie? Was it the old sister? And he says, and the zombies are evil, and they just want to kill people. And he's very superstitious. He sort of freaks out, and there's like, I can't say anymore. He goes to throw some wood on the fire from the woodpile in his house, and what happens?
He gets bitten by a snake.
Yes, there's a coral snake in the woodpile. He screams, he gets bitten. The sheriff, you don't see it, but the sheriff beats it to death with a piece of log from the fire, and he dies instantly.
Yeah.
So I think we can safely say at this point, the sheriff no longer suspects Tim.
Yes. So let's pause here because we have some more zombie stuff.
Yes.
Here. So, all right. So what we learn in the scene is that Jacob has the knowledge to create zombies, or specifically what he calls zoovembies.
Zoovembies, yes.
Which I think are just female zombies. Is that right?
Yes.
So this is interesting. I haven't done any research into whether or not this is a real concept or not. But we have not, in all of the movies we've watched, seen any sort of like gender differentiation between male and female zombies. So I'm kind of intrigued by the idea that a female zombie might be a distinct thing from a regular zombie, in the way that a lot of cultures cast like female ghosts as a distinct thing, like a banshee versus a ghost.
Yes, exactly.
So he calls them zoovembies. And what he says, and am I getting this right, John? Eulalie came to him. Remember, Eulalie was like this supposed servant sort of in the house, and she came to him and demanded from him the secret of how to make zoovembies, right?
Yes, and he reveals this is the piece of information that got him bit, that Eulalie was not a servant in the house. In fact, she was the half-sister of the other three women, and they were cruel to her. They had the same mother, but Eulalie's father was another servant. What they don't say here is there's a racial component to this relationship.
Yes.
Now, right? In that Eulalie is half African American, and the sisters resent her for it.
And so this is all taking place about 50 years after the Civil War. And so I think this would have been, sort of something you probably didn't talk about a lot, but that probably happened a lot, which is the presence of children of a slave and one of the white people in the house.
Yeah. Thomas Jefferson famously had several children.
Yeah. So this would have, been a source of, in the society of the time, this would have been a source of shame and horror. And, one thing you might do is treat the child of this liaison with a servant or a slave as not a full member of the family.
Exactly. To be cruel to them. And this story really is about the cruelty that people can inflict on others in a way. And especially, it just has a racial component you can't avoid. So does Howard's story, though his has a more interesting twist, and we'll get to that.
We do get one interesting little bit here that I think is unique in our zombie movie so far. Mm-hmm. And that is, before he dies, Jacob reveals that only lead bullets can kill a zoovembi.
To which I said, I thought they were lead with brass casings, but maybe that's not the case.
That's a good
Maybe
question.
That's old bullets. I don't actually know.
Well, it harkens back to in some of our earliest zombie movies, where zombies sometimes could be dealt with what you might call like fairy tale banes.
Yes, there was salt in one.
Yeah, like so salt or cold iron or cold steel or whatever.
Yeah.
This sort of fairy tale kind of a weapon or an item or something like that that could negate or destroy an otherwise invulnerable creature.
Yes, exactly. So the sheriff, I loved the sheriff in this scene as they're leaving because they decide, they gotta do something with Jacob's body. But Tim's like, well, what about what he said? And the sheriff becomes angry. He's like, that superstition is nonsense. And he does a great job of sort of portraying like, this scares the hell out of me, but I'm going to insist it's not real.
Yes, I really like the sheriff's performance here. I think he has been really spooked by all the supernatural stuff, and he's trying to make a show of not believing it, but I think he knows that he's in way over his head.
Yes, and as if to prove the point, when they head back out to his car, it's covered in pigeons who are all cooing at him. So one thing that the story explains much better than the show sort of stomps on this. The pigeons are going to come back and we'll hear their sound again. But it is more clear from the Howard story that the pigeons are sort of the spirits not only of the sisters, but of every family member who's lived here, who sort of are bound to this place, to these pigeons, and they become vengeful at night, and that's why Johnny got attacked at the beginning. And that's why they're the pigeons from hell. If we explain the rest of this episode without talking about that, you'd be like, why are the pigeons so important? But that's the sort of position they're in Howard's story. They're literally possessed by spirits of people who died and went to hell. So
that's very cool, and also, kind of absent from this.
It is kind of absent, yeah. Now, here's what do they decide to do? They decide to sleep over again.
Yeah, I don't know what this is like the third or fourth time people have regrouped back in the most haunted mansion ever.
Yes,
but here we are again.
Here we are again.
Over there. Yeah.
Now this is actually great.
Yeah.
The sheriff Buckner says, "All right, Tim, you sleep," because what they've decided to do is they're going to solve this case, and the sheriff's sure that the woman is actually Eulalie, and she's 50. She's just like 90 years old. That was 50 years ago, and she's lived here the whole time. And he's going to prove it, right? So he says, Tim, you sleep. I'm just going to sit up in this chair, keep watch, and then when it gets dark, we're gonna head up there and settle this once and for all. Because and we see a scene of him loading his gun with presumably what are special lead bullets.
Yeah.
However, Tim wakes up, and what does he see?
Well, he sees that the sheriff is gone.
Yes,
he's all by himself.
Yeah. Now, in the story, Tim's nightmares are articulated, and in this one, it is a nightmare of the three sisters, and he sees a vision of them hanging from a rafter. But that's not in this. That's not in this version. So
we should have put that in this.
I know. If that was probably a little too gruesome for them. So Tim, much scarier than before, heads up to the top of the stairs.
So I like this part because, like you were saying before, this is a story where the protagonists of a horror story make a sensible decision.
Yes.
So he starts going upstairs to look for the sheriff, and then he's like, nope, not going to do this. And he walks back down.
Yep.
But then he hears that beautiful singing and is drawn up the stairs against his will in a trance.
Yes, and we should note that when he first went to sleep, we distinctly heard the pigeons very strongly. Like, he didn't hear the pigeons before, only Johnny heard them, but now he hears them too. However, there's a twist. I thought that Sheriff Bruckner had the whammy put on him, and when he went up there, we got zombie Bruckner, and it's going to be a disaster. However, that's not what happens. We see this leathery hand come out from this doorway, and we see this old woman look at him. And now he's in a trance, walking slowly down the hallway, and she comes out and she lifts a giant cleaver. She's going to split his head open just like Johnny's. However, gunshots, bang, 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 bang. And she screams and flees. Sheriff Buckner had basically left and hid to use Tim as bait to get this woman. They go running into the room that they hadn't gone in before. And what do they see first, Andy?
Well, first they come across three skeletons.
Yes.
3 skeletons of women still dressed in finery.
Southern finery, yep. Who are the sisters?
So obviously the 3 sisters.
Yep.
And then they explore a little further and they find, well, I guess, why don't you reveal what they find?
They find Eulalie, and she's finally dead. And
she is the old lady that attacked him with the cleaver.
And she's the old lady who attacked him with the cleaver. And that is the end of the episode. Mystery solved. Now, there's one crucial thing that is different that I wanted to share here. So in this version of the story, Eulalie turns herself into a zombie to take vengeance on these sisters because she wants the power of being an undead to kill them, essentially. In the story, it's a little more sinister than that. She was a servant who was horribly tormented by these women. Okay? So in her name, the same character, Eulalie, is named Joan, and she's the servant who gets horribly tortured. She does go to Jacob and say, you give me that potion to turn people into zombies. But she doesn't take it. She puts it in one of the sisters' food. Oh. And so her vengeance is to turn her cruel master into a monster who then kills her own sisters. Oh, and that's the twist that people were disappointed is not in this episode.
Okay. That's quite a bit cooler than this TV adaptation's version.
Yeah. So that's Pigeons from Hell from the show Thriller 1961. What do you think of this, Andy?
So I went into this not expecting much.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'd never heard of the show Thriller.
I hadn't either. Isn't that weird? I guess if you're less than 100 episodes, you don't get syndication, right? This is the old rule, is if you hit 100, you can get syndication because then they can just show it nonstop over and over again. I don't know that Twilight Zone had 100. I'd have to look it up. But 67 episodes, they just quite didn't have enough. And I was looking at the page. There's an episode with William Shatner. I feel like this could have been a show we remember, like the Twilight Zone, and it just wasn't.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this was a time like the Twilight Zone adapted a lot of short stories to be its more famous episodes. Yeah, I mean, it makes me want to dig through other episodes of Thriller to see if there's any kind of hidden gems in there, because I would call this a hidden gem. I'd never heard of it. I had heard of this story by Howard. I'd never read it. But, this is exactly the sort of story that works well as an adaptation for a 1-hour TV show.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of a novella. It's probably 90 pages, maybe 80 pages. It's worth reading. Yeah. This show is worth, this episode at least is worth watching. I just watched it on YouTube, so you could find it if you wanted to. For a modern horror fan that wants something a little more fast-paced, it's sort of like Bunny Lake is Missing. It is intentionally slow and deliberate. However, again, in this story, it works, right?
Yeah.
There is a jump scare at the beginning, and that set piece is awesome. And then it just sort of becomes this creepy solve the mystery kind of story. So
yeah.
All right, Andy, let's not do all our questions. Why don't you just choose the ones you think are good to ask here?
Yeah, this isn't a movie, so we won't go through the usual questions we go through, but let's just talk about the zombie as it appears in Pigeon from Hell. So what kind of a zombie, what strain of zombie are we dealing with? And here's an additional question. What movies have we seen that this portrayal of the zombie that seem most close to this portrayal of a zombie?
Yeah, so the one that immediately. So these zombies are created by a curse, by revenge, and then a curse that creates these zombies. So when Johnny
there's a physical component, right? I mean, it's like a potion.
It's definitely voodoo, right? They say he's from Barbados, but they say zombie. I don't know that they use the word voodoo, but all of that is suggested, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
However, there's also a curse tied up here, which I think is important. And that's why it reminded me of Zombies of Moritau, because it's curse-based. But in terms of the zombie itself, what did that actually... Not either Johnny, who became a zombie, or the first Eulalie, the woman who became a zombie that started the whole curse.
Yes.
What did you think? What would you say is different about that than, say, Zombies of Moritau?
Oh, well, so there is a process. There is a zombification process.
Right.
It's not something that just happens naturally or just because of a curse.
That's right.
It's mystical, but it involves, I think, the creation of a physical component to it.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but it's kind of like White Zombie. What was the one? The Jennifer Grey one?
Ritual.
Ritual, which was based on, was that based on I Walked with a Zombie?
It was.
It was,
yes.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that sort of component where the zombie is sort of created, but it also has that curse element too. So I think there's a lot going on here.
So just to clarify here, Eula Lee is sort of our core zombie or Zuvembi.
Yep.
She was created by like a voodoo process.
Correct.
People she kills seem to rise back spontaneously as zombies.
Yes.
Again, it has that feel of like almost Contagion, but I think it's like a curse at work.
Yeah, it feels like a zombie master who can dispense a curse, kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they just become, murderous, mindless automatons.
Right. Yes.
So, is there anything new? Are there any zombie firsts here? And I want to call out, I don't think we have heard the term Zuvembi before.
I do not recall that.
I want to call this out as the first, like, quote, gendered zombie.
Yes.
If you will.
Yeah.
Zombies in the films we've watched, zombies have been mostly, but not entirely men. And the word zombie could refer equally to a man or a woman who's undergone whatever the zombification process of the movie is. This is the first time we've had the female zombie split out, and I think that's pretty fascinating.
I thought it was fascinating too. I would like to say this isn't a first. I don't know that this is a first, but in 1961, here we're having somebody who is killed and immediately returning as a bloodthirsty cannibalistic zombie.
Yeah,
which I don't feel like we saw that in any of the movies around this time. So it might be a first. It's certainly early for that to be happening.
I think in the 50s we had, let's see, when was Moritau? That
was 56, I believe.
Okay, so we do have this idea that zombies could, with some effort, make additional zombies. But this has a sort of immediacy to it, like a speed to it. That, like, there is a sense that, like, shortly after he was killed by the Zuvembi, Johnny rises again as a zombie, and that it just has a sort of immediate terror to it that I don't think we've seen before. The violence, I mean, there's no real on-screen violence here exactly, but there's just a little bit more intensity to this than I expected from 1960, 1961. Holding a bloody hatchet, a blood-covered guy with a wound on his head holding a bloody hatchet. I would call that gnarly.
I was delighted by the sort of terror of that scene and how intense it was, and the sort of quality of the show overall. Like, it's not going to win an Emmy, but like I was drawn in. I was compelled to watch it with a lot of focus. I thought it was good.
Agreed. All right, so John, let's close out with the 3 traditional closing questions we have.
Yeah.
Would you, John, and me, Andy, survive in the zombie world of Pigeons from Hell? Why or why not?
Can I pitch to you why neither of us would survive?
Yes, please.
Even though you go by Andy, your first name is also John, and the guy who gets killed in this movie is John, and I'm John. So I think John's just can't survive in this situation.
So here's why I would. So the fatal decision that dooms these people is the decision not to, like, sleep in their car.
No.
But to set up camp in the haunted mansion.
I would never do that. Yeah.
See, I find decrepit old plantations, like, that is like catnip to me as far as as cool location to explore.
Yeah.
I think I would be the idiot insisting that we camp out in the clearly haunted plantation.
So what we're saying here is you might get me killed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you would be the one being like, come on, what are we doing here? And then, you would fall victim to it.
Yes.
John, is this a movie, or let's say, is this a zombie TV show, or is this a TV show that happens to have some zombies in it?
I think the zombie creation is essential to this story. So I would say it's a zombie TV show.
I think so too. If it's something other than a zombie, it just changes the tenor of the story to a different story.
I agree. And this is sort of part of that 60s revival where the 1930s sort of classic voodoo style zombies are making a comeback, even though other parts of the horror genre, different weird things are happening with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. And then our final question, John. John, do you recommend the TV episode Pigeons from Hell? Firstly, do you recommend it to a general audience? Is this something that everyone should take time out of their life to check out? And secondly, do you specifically recommend it to our zombie-loving listeners as something that really has something special for zombie fans?
I would say yes to our zombie listeners, the zombie watchers. I think it really does have something special. It's early, it's kind of gruesome, and it's genuinely scary at points. So I would say yes. And for those same reasons, I would recommend it to pretty much anyone to watch. If you like older TV or just nice, solid yarns, like I enjoyed it, and I would recommend other people watch it.
I agree. I think I'd give it a pretty soft recommendation to a general audience, just because it is pretty slow by modern standards.
Yep.
And so you do have to sort of have patience. If you have been watching some of the other stuff from this era, you by default have the patience required to watch this. But definitely, I give it a strong recommendation to zombie fans. Again, for me not to keep harping on it, I find the Zuvembi really interesting as a concept, and I'm curious why it kind of seems to have not gone anywhere in the zombie film genre.
Yeah, so. I am too. So, all right, that's a wrap on Pigeons from Hell. Recommendations all around, some a little lighter than others. However, Andy, we're not done yet. We were originally going to do an episode where we talked about 2 episodes of TV, but we both enjoyed the episode we were assigned so much that I turned Pigeons from Hell into a full episode, and we're going to do a full episode on another piece of TV. What is that, Andy?
Yeah, so originally I thought, we'll just do 1 episode of Zombie Strains here and we'll squeeze in 2 TV shows. But both of the TV shows we watched were like, okay, there's a lot to unpack here. So we are going to take a trip to the maybe somewhat unexpected world of the Avengers.
Yes, not Marvel's Avengers.
Not Marvel's Avengers. There's no Thanos here, no snapping and disintegrating half the universe or whatever. No, this is the British spy show from the 60s. Very, very influential. And, having dipped my toes into it in preparation for a coming episode, I got to say, I have never seen something more 1960s than this show. Like, never in my life.
I feel like this is one of the core influences on like Austin Powers.
Oh, yes. I had that specific thought while I was watching. We'll unpack it when we get to it. But I was like, I think Austin Powers might have been making fun of this show, not James Bond.
Yes.
So anyway, they get into all sorts of adventures, but at least once they cross paths with The Walking Dead. And so John and I are going to see what happens when John Steed and Emma Peel cross paths with zombies.
All right. Looking forward to it. Folks, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Rate us in the podcast app or on Spotify. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon for a discussion of The Avengers. You've been listening to Zombie Strains. We'll be back next episode to talk about another zombie movie. If you enjoyed our podcast, please take a moment to rate us in your podcast app of choice. Tell a friend. Follow us on Instagram at Zombie Strains. All of this helps like-minded people find the show. See you next time.